The city of Chicago hummed with its relentless pulse, a symphony of honking taxis, chattering crowds, and the distant wail of sirens weaving through the skyscrapers. In the heart of River North, where neon lights flickered against the dusk, Olivia Carter stood outside a greasy diner, her apron stained with the day's labor. The air was thick with the scent of fried onions and exhaust, a gritty reminder of the world she inhabited, far removed from the gleaming towers looming above. Her dark curls clung to her forehead, damp with sweat, as she balanced a tray of empty plates, her arms trembling, not from the weight, but from the weight of her reality. Her mother, battling illness at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, was a ticking clock in Olivia's heart, each hospital bill a chain tightening around her dreams. Olivia, a black woman in her late 20s, carried herself with a quiet resilience, her deep brown eyes holding a spark of defiance against the odds stacked against her. She had grown up in Englewood, a neighborhood where hope was a currency often spent in vain, but she refused to let it define her. Her mother, Evelyn, had raised her on stories of strength of ancestors who carved paths through impossible odds, and now, as Evelyn lay frail in a hospital bed, Olivia felt the weight of that legacy pressing down on her. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on her face as she glanced at the clock, 9:47 p.m. Her shift would end soon, but the night held no promise of rest, only the gnawing worry of another bill she couldn't pay. As she cleared a table, a rowdy patron in the corner laughed too loudly, their voice slurring with cheap beer. One of them, a man with a crooked grin, waved her over. "Hey, sweetheart, how about a smile for the tip?" He slurred his eyes, raking over her with a familiarity that made her skin crawl. Olivia forced a tight smile, her practiced mask of professionalism, and murmured a polite response before turning away. She had learned long ago to swallow her anger, to let it simmer beneath the surface. But tonight it felt heavier, like a storm gathering strength. The diner's door swung open, admitting a gust of cool September air, and a figure who seemed to pull the room's gravity toward him. Brian Moore stepped inside his presence, commanding without effort. He was a man in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp features, softened only by the faintest hint of weariness in his green eyes. His tailored suit, a deep navy that absorbed the light, marked him as someone who belonged to the city's elite, not to this greasy corner of River North. His pale skin contrasted starkly with the warm tones of the diner, and his stride carried the confidence of a man who owned the world, or at least a significant portion of Chicago's skyline. As CEO of Moore Enterprises, a tech conglomerate headquartered in the Loop, Brian was a name whispered in boardrooms and feared in negotiations. Yet here he was, an anomaly in this world of chipped mugs and sticky floors. Olivia barely glanced at him, focusing on the tray she carried to the kitchen. But Brian's eyes found her, immediately drawn to how she moved, purposeful, unyielding like a river carving through stone. He sat at the counter, his gaze lingering as she disappeared behind the swinging doors. He wasn't here for the food. He rarely visited places like this. Tonight, he was chasing a lead, a tip about a shady deal unfolding in the back rooms of a nearby club that threatened his company's interests. But something about Olivia, the quiet strength in her posture, held his attention longer than he intended. The night took a darker turn when Olivia's shift ended. She slipped out the back door, pulling her worn jacket tight against the chill, and headed toward the L train. The streets of River North were alive with nightlife, but danger lurked in the shadows. As she passed a dimly lit alley, a man stepped out, his voice low and menacing. "You're the girl from the diner. Heard you need cash. I got a job for you." His words were laced with an offer she recognized immediately, one that promised quick money, but at a cost she refused to pay. Her heart raced, but she squared her shoulders, her voice steady. "I'm not interested. Get out of my way." The man laughed, stepping closer, his breath sour with liquor. "You don't get to say no, sweetheart." Before she could react, another figure emerged from the darkness. Brian Moore, his expression cold as steel. She said no. He said, his voice low, but carrying the weight of authority. The man faltered, sizing up Brian's imposing frame, then muttered a curse and slunk back into the shadows. Olivia's pulse pounded, her gratitude warring with suspicion. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing. Brian's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. "Wrong place, right time," he replied, his tone enigmatic. "You shouldn't be walking alone out here." Olivia bristled, her pride flaring. "I can handle myself." But her words felt hollow against the memory of the man's threat. Brian didn't argue. He only tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she wasn't used to. "I'm sure you can," he said, then turned to leave, his silhouette blending into the neon glow of the street. Olivia watched him go, her heart tangled with relief, curiosity, and something she couldn't name. The next day, Olivia sat in the hospital's sterile waiting room, clutching a crumpled bill from Northwestern Memorial. The numbers blurred before her eyes. $22,000 for her mother's treatment, a sum that dwarfed her savings. Evelyn's condition was worsening, and the doctor's words echoed in her mind. "Without payment, soon we may need to adjust her care." Olivia's chest tightened, her resolve hardening. She couldn't lose her mother, who had taught her to dream beyond the confines of their world. But the diner's meager wages wouldn't be enough, and desperation clawed at her. As she wiped down tables at the diner that evening, a woman in a sleek blazer approached her. "Olivia Carter," she asked, her voice crisp. "I'm from Moore Enterprises. We're looking for temporary staff for an event. The pay's good, $500 for the night." "Interested?" Olivia hesitated, her instincts wary, but the promise of money was a lifeline she couldn't ignore. "What's the catch?" she asked. The woman smiled thinly. "No catch. Just show up and do the job." The job was at a private club in River North, a world of velvet ropes and crystal chandeliers that felt like a foreign country to Olivia. She arrived in a borrowed black dress, her nerves jangling as she navigated a room filled with Chicago's elite. The air was thick with cigar smoke and whispered deals, and Olivia's role was to serve drinks and keep her head down. But the night took a turn when a group of men, their eyes glassy with bourbon, cornered her near the bar. "Your new one," slurred his hand, grazing her arm. "How much for a private show?" Olivia's stomach churned, but a familiar voice cut through the haze before she could respond. "Back off," Brian Moore said, his tone icy. He stood between Olivia and the men, his presence a wall of authority. The men muttered apologies and scattered, but Olivia's anger flared. "I don't need you saving me," she snapped, her voice low but fierce. Brian's eyes softened, a flicker of something respect perhaps crossing his face. "I know," he said, "but they don't get to treat you like that." For a moment, their gazes locked, the club's noise fading into a distant hum. Olivia felt the weight of his words, the sincerity beneath his polished exterior, unsettling her. As the night ended, Brian slipped her an envelope. "Your pay," he said. But when Olivia opened it later, she found $1,000, double the promised amount. A note was tucked inside, written in his sharp, confident hand. "For your mother's treatment, no strings attached." Olivia's heart raced, torn between gratitude and suspicion. Why was this man, a stranger from a world so different from hers, helping her? And what did he want in return? The next morning, Olivia stood outside Moore Enterprises' glass tower in the Loop, the envelope still in her bag. She had decided to return the extra money. She wouldn't be anyone's charity case. But as she stepped into the lobby, a receptionist handed her a card, an invitation to interview for a position at the company. Olivia's mind spun. This wasn't just a job, but a chance to change her life. but it also meant stepping into Brian Moore's world, where she might not belong. As she rode the elevator to the 40th floor, her reflection in the glass showed a woman caught between fear and determination, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The glass tower of Moore Enterprises stood like a sentinel in Chicago's Loop, its sleek lines reflecting the morning sun in a dazzling display of power. Olivia Carter stepped out of the elevator onto the 40th floor, her heart pounding as she adjusted the borrowed blazer that felt too stiff against her skin. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth marble floors, abstract art, and a receptionist who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Scuffed from years of wear, Olivia's sneakers squeaked faintly against the polished surface, a reminder of the chasm between her world and this one. She was here for an interview, a chance she hadn't dared to dream of a week ago, but the weight of Brian Moore's note still lingered in her mind. No strings attached. She didn't believe it. Nothing in her life had ever come without a price. The interview was a blur of questions about her skills, basic admin work, data entry, nothing glamorous. But Olivia answered with a quiet confidence that surprised even herself. Her years at the diner taught her to think on her feet and navigate chaos gracefully, and she leaned into that now. The hiring manager, a woman named Carla with a sharp bob and sharper eyes, seemed impressed. "You're hired," she said, her tone brisk. "Start tomorrow. Data clerk $25 an hour. Don't be late." Olivia nodded, her chest swelling with a mix of relief and disbelief. This was a lifeline, a way to keep her mother's treatment going. But as she left the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that Brian Moore's shadow loomed over her opportunity. Her first day at Moore Enterprises was a plunge into a world of polished suits and whispered power plays. The open-plan office buzzed with activity phones, ringing keyboards clacking, and employees moving with the urgency of those who knew their work shaped the city's skyline. Olivia's desk was a small island in the sea of cubicles, her computer screen glowing with spreadsheets she barely understood. She was an outsider here, a black woman from Englewood, navigating a space where most faces were white, their accents polished by Ivy League degrees. The weight of their glances pressed against her, some curious, others dismissive. But Olivia kept her head high, her mother's voice echoing in her mind. "You are enough, Liv. Always." Her colleagues were a mixed bag. Marcus Lee, a kind-eyed marketing assistant who'd grown up in Hyde Park, offered her a warm smile and a quick tutorial on the company's software. He said, "You'll get the hang of it," and his voice was easy and reassuring. But not everyone was so welcoming. Jessica Reed, a senior coordinator with sleek blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, watched Olivia with barely concealed disdain. "You're the new girl," Jessica said on Olivia's second day, her tone dripping with condescension. "Hope you can keep up. This isn't a diner." Olivia bit back a retort, her fingers tightening around her coffee mug. She wouldn't let Jessica's barbs unravel her. The real challenge came when Brian Moore himself appeared in the office. He moved through the space like a storm cloud, his presence commanding silence. Employees straightened in their chairs, their voices dropping to whispers. Olivia kept her eyes on her screen, but she felt his gaze before she saw him, a weight that settled on her like a spotlight. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice smooth but edged with authority, as he stopped by her desk. "I need you to compile the Q3 financial reports by the end of the day. Can you handle it?" The question wasn't just about the task. It was a test. Olivia met his gaze, her heart racing, but her voice steady. "Yes, Mr. Moore. I'll have it done." The task was daunting, rows of numbers and jargon she'd never encountered, but Olivia threw herself into it, staying late, as the office emptied and the city's lights twinkled beyond the windows. She taught herself the basics from online tutorials, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she pieced together the report. By 10 p.m., she emailed the finished document to Brian, her eyes burning, but her spirit alight with pride. She'd done it. She'd proven she could belong here. The next morning, Brian summoned her to his office, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the Chicago River. Olivia's pulse quickened as she stepped inside the space, starkly contrasted to her cramped apartment in Inglewood. Brian sat behind a mahogany desk, his suit jacket draped over his chair, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. The report was impressive. He said, his green eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Most new hires would have crumbled under that pressure. "Why didn't you?" Olivia hesitated, then spoke from the heart. "I've been under pressure my whole life, Mr. Moore. This is just a different kind." Her words hung in the air, raw and unguarded, and Brian's guarded expression softened momentarily. "Call me Brian," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "And keep that fire, Olivia. You'll need it here." Their exchange was interrupted by Jessica, who knocked sharply on the glass door. "Mr. Moore, the board meeting is starting," she said, her eyes flicking to Olivia, with thinly veiled suspicion. As Olivia left the office, she overheard Jessica's whisper to a colleague. "She's only here because he feels sorry for her." You know how these people get hired. The words stung a reminder of the invisible barriers Olivia faced, but she refused to let them define her. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of work and subtle tensions. Olivia excelled at her tasks, earning quiet nods from her supervisors. But Jessica's hostility grew. She spread rumors that Olivia was Brian's pet, a jab that carried the sting of racial undertones. Marcus, ever the ally, warned Olivia to watch her back. He said that Jessica's got her eye on a promotion over coffee at a cafe near Millennium Park. "She sees you as a threat." Olivia sipped her latte, her gaze drifting to the park's silver bean, glinting in the sunlight. She said, "I was here to do my job." But Marcus shook his head. "You're doing more than that, Liv. You're catching Brian Moore's attention, and that's dangerous." Dangerous or not, Olivia couldn't deny the pull she felt toward Brian. It wasn't just his power or looks, though his sharp jawline and piercing eyes were hard to ignore. It was how he saw her, not as a charity case or a token hire, but as someone capable of standing toe-to-toe with him. Their interactions were brief, but charged, like when he handed her a file and their fingers brushed, sending a jolt through her. "You're doing good work, Olivia," he said softly, his voice lingering in her mind long after she left his office. The tension arose at a company event at the Peninsula, Chicago, a glittering affair of champagne flutes and power suits. In a simple but elegant black dress, Olivia felt like an imposter among the city's elite. Jessica cornered her near the dessert table, her smile venomous. "You don't belong here, Olivia. This isn't your world." Before Olivia could respond, a new figure approached Victoria Hayes, a striking woman in a crimson gown, her blonde hair cascading in perfect waves. "Is there a problem?" Victoria asked, her voice smooth but laced with authority. Jessica faltered, but Olivia held her ground. "No problem," she said, her chin lifted. "Just a misunderstanding." Victoria's eyes narrowed, appraising Olivia like a predator sizing up prey. "You must be the new girl Brian's been talking about," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Don't get too comfortable." Olivia's heart sank as she realized who Victoria was, a powerful heiress and rumored fiancée of Brian Moore. The room seemed to close around her, the weight of their differences, race-class power pressing down. But as she glanced across the room and caught Brian's eye, his gaze steady and unwavering, she felt a spark of defiance. She wasn't here to play their games. She was here to build a future for herself and her mother. As the night ended, Brian found her by the hotel's terrace, the city's skyline a glittering backdrop. "You held your own tonight," he said, his voice low and warm. Olivia met his gaze, her heart racing. "I have to," she replied. "This world doesn't give me a choice." They stood silently for a moment, the space between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Olivia didn't know what Brian Moore wanted from her, but she knew one thing: she wouldn't let him or anyone define her worth. The peninsula Chicago glittered like a jewel against the night sky, its chandeliers casting golden light across the ballroom, where Chicago's elite mingled in a dance of power and privilege. Olivia Carter stood at the edge of the room, her black dress hugging her frame with understated elegance, but her heart thrummed with unease. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, and the clink of champagne flutes, a world so far removed from the Englewood streets she'd grown up on, that it felt like stepping into a dream or a trap. As a data clerk at Moore Enterprises, she'd been invited to this corporate gala as a formality. Still, every glance from the polished crowd reminded her she was an outsider, a black woman navigating a sea of privilege where she was expected to sink. Olivia's dark eyes scanned the room, catching glimpses of executives in tailored suits and women in gowns that cost more than her monthly rent. She clutched her glass of sparkling water, her fingers tight around the stem, grounding herself against the whispers that followed her. "She's the one Brian hired," someone murmured nearby, the words laced with curiosity and something sharper judgment. Olivia straightened her chin, lifting with the defiance her mother Evelyn had instilled in her. She was here to do her job, to prove she belonged. But the weight of their stares pressed against her like a tide. Across the room, Brian Moore stood in conversation with a group of investors, his navy suit impeccable. His presence, a quiet storm that drew every eye. His green gaze found Olivia lingering for a moment that felt like an eternity, and a flicker of warmth softened his sharp features. He'd been distant since their last encounter in his office, where her raw honesty had cracked his polished exterior. But his attention felt like a lifeline tonight. Olivia's breath caught her heart, torn between the pull of his gaze and the reality of their worlds. His a tower of glass and power, hers a struggle to keep her mother alive at Northwestern Memorial. The moment was shattered when Victoria Hayes swept into the room, a vision in crimson silk that seemed to demand worship. Her blonde hair cascaded in perfect waves, and her smile was a weapon sharp and calculated. As the heiress to Hayes Industries, a rival tech firm, Victoria was a fixture in Chicago's high society, and rumors swirled that she was Brian's fiancée, a match made in boardrooms and gossip columns. Olivia had heard the whispers, felt their sting, but she refused to let them define her. Still, Victoria's presence was a storm cloud, and as the woman's eyes locked onto her, Olivia felt the air shift. "Miss Carter," Victoria said, her voice honeyed but laced with venom as she approached. "You're the talk of the evening. Quite the feat for someone so new." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Olivia met her gaze, her voice steady, despite the knot in her stomach. "I'm just here to do my job, Ms. Hayes." Victoria's lips curved a predator's smile. "Oh, but you're doing so much more, aren't you?" Catching Brian's eye isn't exactly in the job description. The words were a blade slicing at Olivia's resolve. She felt the eyes of the room on her, the weight of their assumptions that she was here not for her work, but for something less honorable. Before she could respond, Jessica Reed, the senior coordinator who'd made Olivia's first weeks at Moore Enterprises, a gauntlet of subtle slights, sidled beside Victoria. "She's out of her depth," Jessica said, her voice low, but loud enough for Olivia to hear. "Some people think they can charm their way to the top." Olivia's fingers tightened around her glass, but she refused to flinch. "If you have something to say, Jessica, tell it to my face." Her voice was calm, but it carried the steel of someone who'd faced worse than petty office politics. Jessica faltered, but Victoria's laugh was a cold chime. "Bold," she said, But boldness won't help you here. This world has rules, Olivia, and you don't know them. The tension was a living thing coiling around them when Brian's voice cut through the haze. Is there a problem? He stood beside Olivia now, his presence a shield, his eyes locked on Victoria with a chill that could freeze the room. Victoria's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flickered with something, anger perhaps, or fear. No problem, Brian, she said, her tone light. Just getting to know your new employee. The pause was deliberate, a jab meant to wound. Brian's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. Olivia's work speaks for itself. Unlike some, she doesn't need to play games to prove her worth. The words were a quiet rebuke, and Victoria's smile faltered. She excused herself with a graceful nod, but her eyes promised retribution as she glided away, Jessica trailing in her wake. Olivia exhaled, her heart racing, but Brian's hand brushed her elbow, a fleeting touch that grounded her. You okay? He asked, his voice softer now, meant only for her. Olivia said, I don't need you fighting my battles, but her tone lacked her intended edge. Brian's lips twitched, a hint of a smile. I know, but I don't like seeing you cornered. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made her chest ache. For a moment the ballroom faded, and it was just the two of them caught in a dance of unspoken truths. But the moment passed, and Brian stepped back, his CEO mask slipping back into place. Enjoy the evening, Olivia, he said, then turned to rejoin the investors, leaving her with a heart full of questions. The rest of the gala was a blur of forced smiles and small talk, but Victoria's words lingered like a bruise. Olivia slipped out to the terrace, needing air, needing space. The Chicago skyline stretched before her, a constellation of beautiful and unreachable lights. She thought of her mother, of the hospital bills piling up, and of Brian's gaze, which seemed to see her in a way no one else did. Was she a fool to feel something for him? A man whose world was so different from hers? A man rumored to belong to someone like Victoria? As if summoned by her thoughts, Brian appeared beside her, his silhouette sharp against the city's glow. You're hiding, he said, his voice low, teasing but gentle. Olivia laughed softly, surprised by the sound. Maybe I am. This isn't my scene. Brian leaned against the railing, his eyes on the river below. It's not mine either sometimes. Too many masks. His honesty caught her off guard, and she turned to face him, searching his expression. Then why are you here? She asked. He hesitated, then met her gaze. Because it's part of the game. But you, Olivia, you don't play by their rules. That's why they're scared of you. His words were a spark igniting something in her chest. She wanted to ask what he meant, to unravel the mystery of this man who seemed to straddle her world, and his with such ease, but a shout from inside broke the moment. Mr. Moore, the investors need you, a voice called, and Brian's expression tightened. Stay out of trouble, he said with a wry smile, then left her alone with the stars and her racing heart. The night ended with a confrontation Olivia hadn't anticipated. Victoria cornered her in the cloakroom as she retrieved her coat, her eyes blazing. Can you waltz in here and take what's mine? She hissed. Brian and I have history. You're nothing but a distraction. Olivia's temper flared, but she kept her voice steady. If Brian's yours, then why are you so worried about me? Victoria's face twisted, but before she could respond, Olivia walked away, her head high, her heart pounding with the thrill of defiance. Olivia lay awake in her small apartment in Englewood, the night's events replaying in her mind. Victoria's words were a warning, but Brian's presence was a promise of what she wasn't sure. All she knew was that she was stepping into a world where power and desire were intertwined and would need all her strength to navigate it. The Chicago wind howled through the canyons of the Loop, carrying the bite of autumn as Olivia Carter stepped into Moore Enterprises' glass tower. Her days as a data clerk had morphed into something more, a role that demanded her intellect and tested her resilience. She'd been at the company for a month now, her desk, a small fortress of organized chaos, spreadsheets, sticky notes, and a framed photo of her mother Evelyn, smiling in better days. The hospital bills still loomed, but Olivia's new salary was a lifeline keeping Evelyn's treatment at Northwestern Memorial afloat. Yet the office was a battlefield, and Olivia was learning that survival required more than hard work navigating the unspoken rules of a world that wasn't built for her. Her mornings began with a ritual, a strong coffee from a cafe near Millennium Park, a deep breath, and a silent promise to herself to rise above the whispers that trailed her. She was a Black woman in a space where power was pale and male, and every task she completed felt like a small rebellion against those who doubted her. Marcus Lee, her ally in the marketing department, was a constant source of encouragement, his easy laugh a balm against the tension. "You're killing it, Liv," he'd said over lunch at a food truck, his brown eyes warm with admiration. "Don't let the sharks get to you." But the sharks were circling, and their leader was Jessica Reed. With her polished blonde bob and venomous smile, Jessica had made it her mission to undermine Olivia. Her latest move came during a team meeting where Olivia presented a data analysis she'd spent nights perfecting. The room was a sea of suits. Brian Moore at the head of the table, his presence a quiet storm. Olivia's voice was steady as she walked through her findings, her charts projecting onto the screen with crisp precision. The executives nodded, impressed, but Jessica's voice cut through like a knife. "It's a solid effort," she said, her tone saccharine. "But there are errors in the projections. I caught them last night." She slid a marked-up printout across the table, her eyes gleaming triumphantly. Olivia's heart sank as she scanned the document, her work now marred with red ink. She knew there were no errors. She'd triple-checked every number. But Jessica's accusation hung in the air, challenging her credibility. The room turned to Brian, whose expression was unreadable. "Olivia," he said, his voice calm but firm, "walk us through your process." It wasn't a question. It was a chance to defend herself. Olivia took a breath, her mother's strength flowing through her, and explained her methodology with clarity and confidence. The executives nodded again by the end, and Jessica's smile faltered. After the meeting, Brian called Olivia to his office. "You handled that well," he said, leaning back in his chair, his green eyes studying her with an intensity that made her pulse race. "Jessica's playing a game, but you're better than that." Olivia's cheeks warmed, but she held his gaze. "I don't have time for games, Brian. I'm here to work." His lips curved a rare smile that felt like a gift. "Good. Because I'm putting you on the Kingston project. It's high profile, and I trust you to deliver." The weight of his trust was both a thrill and a burden, and Olivia nodded, determined to prove him right. The Kingston project was a beast, a multi-million-dollar contract with a tech startup that could cement Moore Enterprises' dominance in Chicago's market. Olivia threw herself into it, working late nights at her desk, the city's lights her only company. She analyzed market trends, drafted proposals, and taught herself coding basics to understand the startup's product. Her dedication paid off when she presented her initial findings to Brian, who leaned forward, his eyes alight with something that looked like pride. "This is exceptional," he said, his voice low, intimate. "You're not just keeping up, Olivia. You're setting the pace." Their late-night meetings became a ritual. The office empty, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the electric tension between them. One night as they reviewed documents, Brian's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver through her. "You're relentless," he said, his voice soft, almost reverent. "Why do you push so hard?" Olivia hesitated, then spoke the truth. "Because I must. For my mom. For myself." Brian's gaze softened, and the distance between their worlds seemed to shrink momentarily. But the office wasn't a haven. Jessica's hostility escalated, culminating in a cruel trap. Olivia arrived one morning to find her desk in disarray, with critical project files missing. A note in Jessica's handwriting was pinned to her monitor. "Careless Olivia." Panic surged, but Olivia's instincts kicked in. She searched the office, finding the files hidden in a supply closet, but the damage was done. A client meeting was scheduled in an hour, and the files were incomplete. Olivia's heart pounded as she raced to reconstruct her work, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She made it to the meeting just in time, and her presentation was flawless, but the strain showed in her eyes. Brian noticed. After the clients left, he pulled her aside. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low, concerned. Olivia hesitated, then told him about the files, the note, the sabotage. Brian's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening with anger. "Jessica's done," he said, his tone final. "I won't tolerate this." Olivia shook her head, her voice firm. "Don't fire her because of me. I can handle her." Brian's expression softened, a mix of frustration and admiration. He said you shouldn't have to, but he respected her request, promising to address Jessica's behavior discreetly. The victory was bittersweet. Olivia's success on the Kingston project earned her a promotion to Brian's assistant, a role that brought her closer to him and deeper into the office's web of intrigue. Marcus, ever the friend, congratulated her over drinks at a jazz club in the South Loop, and the music was a soulful backdrop to their conversation. "You're climbing fast, Liv," he said, his eyes lingering on her with a warmth that felt different, more personal. "But be careful. Brian's world is a minefield." Olivia smiled, brushing off the warning, but Marcus's words stayed with her. That night, as she walked home through the quiet streets of Englewood, Olivia's thoughts were a tangle of ambition and longing. Brian's trust in her was a beacon, but it came with questions she couldn't answer. Why did he believe in her so fiercely? And why did his every glance feel like a spark against her heart? As she unlocked her apartment door, the city's hum, a distant lullaby. Olivia knew one thing: she was no longer just surviving. She was fighting for a place in a world that didn't want her, and with Brian Moore by her side, she might win. The Manhattan skyline shimmered like a promise, its jagged silhouette cutting through the twilight as Olivia Carter stepped out of a cab onto the bustling streets of New York City. The air was crisp, with the first breath of autumn carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor, and the hum of ambition that pulsed through the city. As Brian Moore's newly appointed assistant at Moore Enterprises, Olivia had been whisked away on a high-stakes business trip to secure a partnership with a tech startup in Soho. The weight of her new role pressed against her, but so did the electric pull of being near Brian, a man whose presence seemed to shift the air around her. Their hotel, a sleek tower overlooking Central Park, was a world of marble and muted luxury, far removed from the Englewood streets Olivia called home. She adjusted her navy blazer, a gift from her mother Evelyn, who had insisted she look the part of a rising star. Olivia's reflection in the lobby's mirrored walls showed a woman caught between worlds, her dark curls framing a face that held determination and vulnerability, her brown eyes alight with a fire that refused to dim. She was here to prove herself, not just to Brian or the company, but to the part of her that still feared she didn't belong. The day's meetings were a whirlwind of negotiations and jargon, but Olivia held her own, her sharp insights earning nods from the startup's executives. Brian watched her from across the conference table, his green eyes betraying a flicker of pride that warmed her more than she cared to admit. As the sun dipped below the skyline, he suggested dinner at a rooftop restaurant in Tribeca, where the city's lights seemed to dance just for them. "You did well today," he said, as they settled into a candlelit corner, the Hudson River glinting below. His voice was low, intimate, and Olivia felt the weight of his gaze like a caress. "You're a natural," She laughed softly, stirring her wine, the ruby liquid catching the light, a natural at faking it. "I'm still learning the ropes." Brian leaned forward, his white shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing the strength in his forearms. "You're not faking anything, Olivia. You're the realest person in this room." His words sparkled, igniting a warmth in her chest that she tried to ignore. She was his assistant, nothing more, but how he looked at her, steady, unguarded, made her wonder what lay beneath his polished exterior. Their conversation flowed like the river below, moving from business to childhood dreams. Olivia spoke of her mother's stories of growing up in Englewood, with music and laughter despite the odds. Brian listened, his usual reserve melting away, and shared a rare glimpse of his own past. A boy from a small Illinois town who'd clawed his way to Chicago's elite through sheer will. "We're not so different, you and I," he said, his voice soft, and for a moment, the chasm of race and class between them seemed to narrow. When their hands brushed as they reached for the same breadbasket, the touch lingered, a silent question neither dared to answer. The spell broke when Marcus Lee, another Moore Enterprises employee, appeared at the restaurant, his presence a jolt of reality. With his warm smile and Hyde Park charm, Marcus had been Olivia's friend since her first day at the company. But tonight his eyes held something more. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, pulling up a chair before Brian could respond. Olivia welcomed the distraction, but Brian's jaw tightened, his gaze flickering between them. Oblivious to the tension, Marcus launched into a story about a college prank, his hand resting lightly on Olivia's arm as he laughed. Brian's silence was a storm gathering strength. When Marcus excused himself to take a call, Brian leaned closer, his voice low but edged with something sharp. "You and Marcus seem close." Olivia blinked, caught off guard by the accusation in his tone. "He's a friend," she said, her voice firm. "Nothing more." But Brian's eyes darkened, a shadow of doubt crossing his face. "Just be careful who you trust," he said, then stood abruptly, tossing his napkin on the table. "I have an early meeting. Good night, Olivia." She watched him go, her heart a tangle of frustration and longing. The city's lights seemed dimmer now, the magic of the evening tarnished by his sudden distance. Back at the hotel, Olivia paced her room, replaying his words. Was he jealous? Or was he reminding her of the boundaries between them? A CEO and his assistant, a white man and a black woman, worlds apart, despite their shared moments. Sleep eluded her, the city's hum, a restless echo of her thoughts. The next day the meetings continued, but Brian's demeanor was colder, his instructions clipped. Olivia threw herself into her work, determined to prove her worth, but the sting of his withdrawal lingered. Marcus found her in the hotel's lounge during a break, his expression earnest. "Liv, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low. "I've liked you since we met. I know it's complicated, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way." Olivia's heart sank. Marcus was kind and steady, a man who shared her world in a way Brian never could, but her heart didn't stir for him. "Marcus, you're amazing," she said gently. "But I don't feel the same. I'm sorry." Marcus nodded, his smile tinged with sadness, but no bitterness. "I had to try," he said, then left her alone with her thoughts. When Brian appeared moments later, his eyes caught the tail end of their exchange and his expression hardened. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone clipped. Olivia's temper flared. "Why do you care?" She shot back, her voice low but fierce. "You've been acting like I don't exist all day." Brian's gaze softened, but an executive called him back to the meeting before responding, leaving their words hanging in the air. The trip ended with the partnership secured a triumph for Moore Enterprises, but Olivia felt no victory. On the flight back to Chicago, Brian sat beside her, his silence a wall she couldn't breach. She stared out the window, the clouds a mirror of her turmoil. She wanted to tell him he was wrong about Marcus, that her heart was pulling her toward him, despite every reason it shouldn't, but pride held her back. Brian finally spoke as the plane descended into O'Hare, his voice barely audible over the engines. "I was out of line, Olivia. I don't want to lose what we're building." Her breath caught, but she only nodded, unsure if he meant their working relationship or something more profound. Back in Chicago, Olivia returned to her routine, but the memory of New York lingered like a melody she couldn't shake. She visited her mother at Northwestern Memorial, Evelyn's frail hand warm in hers. Her mother said, "You look different, Liv," her voice weak but sharp. "Something's got your heart in a twist." Olivia smiled, brushing off the observation, but Evelyn's words stayed with her. Brian Moore was a storm she hadn't anticipated, and as she walked through the city's streets, the wind whispering secrets, she wondered if she was ready for the chaos he brought. The Chicago River glinted like molten silver under the late September moon, its surface reflecting the city's restless energy. Olivia Carter stood at her desk on the 40th floor of Moore Enterprises, the office silent, save for the hum of her computer and the distant pulse of the city below. It was past midnight when ambition and desperation blurred into one. As Brian Moore's assistant, Olivia had taken on the Kingston project with a ferocity that surprised even herself, poring over contracts and data until her eyes burned. The project was a high-stakes gamble, a partnership that could redefine Moore Enterprises' place in the tech world, and Olivia was determined to prove she was more than a token hire, more than the black woman from Englewood who'd stumbled into this world of glass and power. Her desk was a battlefield of papers and coffee cups, the glow of her monitor casting shadows across her face. She was reviewing a confidential report on the Kingston startup when a file caught her eye, an encrypted email buried in a folder marked Archive. Curiosity tugged at her, a whisper of instinct, honed by years of navigating a world rarely played fair. She hesitated, then opened it, her heart quickening as she read. The email was from an unknown source detailing a plan to leak Moore Enterprises' proprietary data to a rival firm, Hayes Industries. The words were clinical, ruthless. "Undermine the Kingston deal. Moore's distracted. Now's the time." Olivia's breath caught her mind racing. Hayes Industries was Victoria Hayes's domain, and the implications were clear. Victoria was orchestrating a betrayal that could weaken Brian's company. Olivia's first instinct was to call Brian, but it was 1 a.m., and she didn't want to risk alerting the wrong person. Instead, she copied the email to a secure drive, her fingers trembling with the weight of what she'd uncovered. She was about to shut down her computer when the office door creaked open, and Lauren Brooks, a junior analyst with a sharp tongue and sharper ambitions, stepped inside. Lauren's presence was a jolt, her sleek ponytail and designer scarf out of place in the empty office. She asked about working late. Olivia. Her voice was smooth, but edged with something predatory. Olivia's instincts screamed danger, but she kept her expression neutral. "Just finishing up," she said, closing her laptop with a deliberate click. Lauren's eyes flicked to the screen, her smile thin. She said, "You're digging into things you shouldn't, stepping closer. Some secrets are better left alone." Olivia's heart pounded, but she stood her ground, her voice steady. "I'm doing my job, unlike some people. If you're talking about the Kingston project, it vanished and was replaced by a cold glare. You think you're untouchable because Brian's got a soft spot for you. You're playing a dangerous game, Carter." The threat hung in the air, and Olivia realized Lauren was no mere bystander. She was part of Victoria's scheme, a pawn in a larger game. Before Olivia could respond, the office lights flickered, and a shadow moved in the hallway. Lauren's eyes widened, and she bolted for the door, but Olivia was faster, grabbing her arm. "What do you know about the leak?" she demanded, her voice low but fierce. Lauren yanked free, her face pale. "You'll regret this," she hissed, then fled into the night. Olivia's pulse raced, but she didn't hesitate. She locked the office door, transferred the email to her phone, and called Brian, her fingers shaking as the line rang. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep but sharpening instantly. "Olivia." "What's wrong?" She explained everything. The email. Lauren's threat, the shadow in the hall. Brian said, "I'm coming to you," his tone leaving no room for argument. 20 minutes later, he arrived at the office, his hair disheveled, but his eyes alight with a fierce determination. He scanned the email, his jaw tightening as he read. "Victoria." He muttered the name, a curse. "She's been looking for a way to hit me where it hurts." They worked through the night, piecing together the plot. The email traced back to a server linked to Hayes Industries, and Brian's contacts confirmed Victoria's involvement. "She's desperate to prove herself," he said, his voice low, almost pitying. "Her father's empire is crumbling. She thinks taking me down will save it." Olivia watched him, her heart aching at the weariness in his eyes. "Why do you keep fighting these battles?" she asked, her voice soft. Brian met her gaze, his expression raw. "Because I must, just like you." The moment stretched, charged with an intimacy that made the office feel small. Brian stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, and for a heartbeat, Olivia thought he might close the distance. But a noise outside a janitor's cart broke the spell, and Brian stepped back, his CEO mask slipping into place. "We need to secure the data," he said, his voice brisk. "And we need to confront Victoria." The next day, Brian arranged a meeting with Victoria at a neutral location, a sleek cafe in the Loop where power deals were brokered over espresso. Olivia insisted on coming, her resolve unshaken, despite Brian's protests. "This is my fight too," she said, her eyes fierce. He relented, and they faced Victoria together, the cafe's glass walls reflecting their tension. Victoria arrived in a tailored coat, her smile as sharp as ever. "Brian, Olivia," she said, her tone dripping with false warmth. "What's this about Brian?" Didn't waste words. "We know about the leak, Victoria. Call it off, or I'll take this to your board." Victoria's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, her eyes flicking to Olivia. "You're relying on her now. She's out of her depth, Brian." Olivia's temper flared, but she kept her voice steady. "I found your email, Victoria. I know what you're planning, and I'm not afraid of you." The words were a declaration, a line drawn in the sand, and Brian's hand brushed hers under the table, a silent show of support. Victoria laughed, but it was brittle, her composure cracking. "You'll regret this," she said, then stood, her heels clicking as she left. Brian turned to Olivia, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "You didn't have to do that," he said. Olivia met his gaze, her heart pounding. "Yes, I did. I'm not here to be protected, Brian. I'm here to fight." His lips curved, a rare smile that felt like sunlight after a storm. "I know," he said, and the weight of his words settled in her chest, a promise of something more. Back at the office, they worked to secure the Kingston project, installing new encryption protocols and alerting the startup to the threat. Olivia's role in uncovering the plot earned her quiet respect from her colleagues, but a new tension overshadowed the victory. Lauren Brooks had disappeared, her desk cleared out, and rumors swirled that she'd been working for Victoria all along. Olivia felt the weight of the office's eyes, some impressed, others wary, but she refused to falter. She was carving her place in this world, one battle at a time. That night, as she visited her mother at Northwestern Memorial, Evelyn's eyes sparkled with pride. "You're fighting for something bigger than yourself, Liv," she said, her voice weak but steady. "Don't let anyone take that from you." Olivia squeezed her mother's hand, her thoughts drifting to Brian, the man who saw her strength, who fought beside her, and who, despite every reason not to, was beginning to claim her heart. The Miami sun hung low, painting the sky in hues of coral and gold, its warmth a stark contrast to the incredible opulence of the oceanfront mansion where Moore Enterprises hosted its annual retreat. Olivia Carter stood on the mansion's sprawling terrace, the Atlantic breeze tugging at her teal dress, which clung to her frame with a quiet elegance. The retreat was a showcase of power executives, mingling with cocktails in hand, their laughter mingling with the crash of waves. But for Olivia, it was a battlefield. As Brian Moore's assistant, she had earned her place here through grit and talent, but the weight of being a black woman in this world of privilege pressed against her, a reminder that acceptance was a prize she had to fight for. The mansion, perched on Miami Beach's exclusive Star Island, was a labyrinth of marble and glass, its rooms filled with the city's elite. Olivia's dark curls caught the light as she moved through the crowd, her brown eyes sharp with purpose. She was here to present a progress report on the Kingston project, a task that could solidify her standing at Moore Enterprises. But every step she took was shadowed by whispers, some subtle, others brazen, questioning her presence. "She's Brian's latest project." A man in a linen suit murmured to his companion, his voice low but cutting. "Charity case, if you ask me." Olivia's jaw tightened, but she kept her head high, her mother's voice echoing. "You carry our history, Liv. Don't let them dim your light." The evening began with a dinner under a canopy of fairy lights, the ocean a shimmering backdrop. Olivia sat at a table with senior executives, her notes meticulously prepared. But the conversation around her was a minefield. A woman in a pearl necklace leaned toward her, her smile patronizing. "You must feel so lucky to be here, Olivia. Not many people like you get this chance." The words were a velvet glove over a steel fist, and Olivia's fingers curled around her fork, her voice steady but sharp. "I earned my place just like everyone else." The table fell silent, the woman's smile faltering, but Olivia felt a spark of triumph. She wasn't here to be pitied. The real test came when Victoria Hayes swept onto the terrace, her presence a storm in a cream-colored gown that seemed to glow under the lights. Victoria, the heiress to Hayes Industries, had been a thorn in Olivia's side since their confrontation in Chicago, her every word laced with a venom born of entitlement. Tonight she was flanked by a group of Moore Enterprises' top clients, her smile a calculated weapon. Olivia said, her voice carrying across the terrace. "How charming it was to see you here. I didn't realize assistants were invited to events like this." The crowd tittered, and Olivia felt the weight of their gazes, a silent challenge to prove her worth. Before she could respond, Brian Moore appeared at her side, his navy blazer tailored to perfection, his green eyes alight with a quiet intensity. He said, "Olivia's not just an assistant," his voice calm but commanding. "She's leading the Kingston project, and her work is why we're here tonight." His words were a shield, and Olivia felt a rush of gratitude and a flicker of unease. She didn't want to be defined by his protection. She tried to stand alone. The presentation was her moment. Standing before the crowd projector, casting her slides onto a screen, Olivia spoke with a clarity that silenced the room. She outlined the Kingston project's potential, her voice steady, her data impeccable. The executives leaned forward, their skepticism giving way to interest, and even Victoria's smile tightened. But as Olivia concluded, Victoria stood, her voice cutting through the applause. Impressive, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. But let's be honest. This is Brian's project. You're just delivering the message. The words were a knife, implying Olivia was a token, her success, a gift from Brian's favor. The crowd murmured, and Olivia's heart pounded, but she refused to falter. The data, the strategy, the execution. That's my work, she said, her voice ringing with conviction. If you have questions about the project, I'm happy to answer them. The challenge hung in the air, and Victoria's eyes narrowed, but she sat down silent with a small victory. Brian's gaze met Olivia's, a flicker of pride in his expression, and for a moment, the world felt right. The victory was short-lived. Later, as the crowd dispersed to the mansion's poolside lounge, Victoria cornered Olivia near a palm-lined walkway, her voice low and venomous. "You think you can play in our world?" she hissed. "You're a novelty, Olivia. Brian's fascination will fade, and you'll return where you belong." The words were a slap with racial undertones that cut deeper than Olivia wanted to admit. She stepped closer, her voice steady. "I belong wherever I choose to be, Victoria, and I'm not going anywhere." The confrontation was interrupted by a group of executives, but the tension lingered. Olivia slipped to the beach, needing the ocean's rhythm to calm her racing heart. The sand was cool under her feet, the waves a soothing whisper. She was alone, or so she thought, until Brian's voice broke the silence. "You were incredible tonight," he said, stepping beside her, his shoes dangling from one hand. The moonlight caught his features, softening the sharp lines of his face, and Olivia's breath caught. She said, "I didn't do it for you," but her voice lacked edge, softened by the night. "I know," Brian replied, his gaze on the horizon. "That's why I can't stop watching you." The words were a confession, raw and unguarded, and Olivia felt her defenses waver. They stood in silence, the ocean a witness to the unspoken pull between them. When Brian's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch, it was like a spark in the dark. He said softly, "That you don't have to fight alone," but Olivia shook her head. "I've always fought alone, Brian. It's who I am." He didn't argue, but his eyes held hers, a promise of something she wasn't ready to name. As they walked back to the mansion, the night air thick with possibility, Olivia felt the weight of her own strength and the dangerous allure of a man who saw her as she truly was. The Chicago skyline glowed like a constellation of ambition, its lights reflecting off the glass walls of Brian Moore's penthouse in the Loop. Olivia Carter stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection a silhouette against the city's pulse. The penthouse was a world of sleek lines and muted luxury leather furniture, abstract art, a view that stretched to Lake Michigan, but it felt like a foreign land to Olivia. She was here at Brian's invitation, a rare moment away from the office, but her heart was a storm of doubt and desire. As his assistant, she'd seen the man behind the CEO mask, but tonight she was stepping into his world as something more, and the weight of that shift was both thrilling and terrifying. It had been a week since the Miami retreat, where Olivia's triumph over Victoria Hayes had cemented her place at Moore Enterprises. But the victory had come at a cost. The whispers about her race background, and proximity to Brian had grown louder, a chorus of doubt following her through the office. She'd thrown herself into the Kingston project, working late nights to ensure its success, but the strain was visible in the shadows under her eyes. Brian had noticed, and his invitation to dinner at his penthouse was both a gesture of gratitude and something deeper, something neither of them had named. The evening began with a quiet intimacy. Brian, in a white shirt with sleeves rolled up, moved through the kitchen, surprisingly easily, preparing a meal of grilled salmon and roasted vegetables. The scent filled the air, mingling with the soft jazz playing from a hidden speaker. Olivia watched him, her heart caught by the contrast. Chicago's most powerful man, unguarded in his own space. She said, "I didn't peg you for a cook," leaning against the counter, her teal sweater, a splash of color against the penthouse's muted tones. Brian's lips curved a rare smile that felt like a gift. He said, "I learned out of necessity, stirring a sauce with practiced ease. Small-town life doesn't come with personal chefs." His honesty disarmed her, and as they sat to eat, the conversation flowed like the wine in their glasses. Olivia spoke of her mother Evelyn, whose strength had carried them through years of hardship in Englewood. Brian shared stories of his past, a scholarship kid who'd fought to the top, haunted by the fear of falling back. He said, "We're not so different," echoing their moment in New York, and Olivia felt the truth in her bones. But the weight of their differences lingered. When Brian offered to cover Evelyn's hospital bills, his voice gentle but firm, Olivia's smile faded. "I can't take your money," she said, her tone resolute. "I need to do this on my own." Brian's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with frustration. "Why is it so hard for you to accept help?" he asked, leaning forward, his gaze intense. Olivia met his eyes, her voice steady but raw. "Because I've spent my life proving I'm enough. I won't be your charity case, Brian." The words hung between them, a challenge and a confession. Brian stood crossing to her side of the table, his presence a quiet storm. "You're not a charity case," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "You're the strongest person I know." His hand hovered near hers, a breath from touching, and Olivia's heart raced. The air was thick with unspoken desire, but she stepped back, needing breathing space. "I need to stand alone," she said, her voice softer now. "Not because I don't trust you, but because I have to trust myself." Brian nodded, his expression a mix of respect and longing. "I get it," he said, but his eyes told her he wasn't giving up. They moved to the living room, the city's lights a glittering backdrop, and the conversation shifted to safer ground. The Kingston project, the upcoming board meeting. But the tension remained, a current running beneath their words. When Brian's phone buzzed with a work emergency, he excused himself, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts. She wandered to the window, the city a reminder of how far she'd come and how far she still had to go. The next day, the office was a battleground. Though chastened after her failed sabotage, Jessica Reed still cast sidelong glances at Olivia, her resentment a silent poison. But a new threat emerged. Marcus Lee, Olivia's friend from Hyde Park, approached her during a break, his expression earnest. "I heard about Miami," he said, his voice low. "You're making waves. Liv, but people are talking. They think you're only here because of Brian." The words stung, and Olivia's temper flared. "Let them talk," she said. "I know my worth." Marcus hesitated, then stepped closer, his voice softer. "I'm on your side, Liv. Always have been. But I can't help wondering, is there something between you and Brian?" The question caught her off guard, and Olivia's silence was answer enough. Marcus's face fell, but he nodded, his smile tinged with sadness. "Just be careful," he said, then walked away, leaving Olivia with a heart heavy with guilt and confusion. That week, the Kingston project reached a critical point with a presentation to the board that could make or break the deal. Olivia worked tirelessly, her days a blur of meetings and data, but the pressure was relentless. On the eve of the presentation, she stayed late at the office, the Chicago River, a dark ribbon beyond the windows. Brian found her there. His tie loosened his eyes, tired but warm. "You're pushing too hard," he said, leaning against her desk. "You need to rest." Olivia shook her head, her voice firm. "I can't afford to rest, not when so much is at stake." Brian's gaze softened, and he reached out his hand, brushing her cheek a touch, so gentle it stole her breath. "You're not alone in this, Olivia," he said, his voice a whisper. "Let me be your partner, not just your boss." The words were a confession, a bridge across the chasm between them, and for a moment, Olivia let herself lean into his touch, her heart a riot of hope and fear. But the moment was fleeting. A knock at the door startled them, and a security guard announced a late delivery. Brian stepped back. His expression shuddered, and Olivia felt the loss like a physical ache. As she gathered her things to leave, Brian's voice stopped her. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I'm proud of you." The words lingered in her heart as she walked home through the city's quiet streets, the stars above, a reminder that some dreams were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The Chicago autumn draped the city in a palette of amber and crimson, the leaves falling like whispers of change along the magnificent mile. Olivia Carter stood in the glass-walled conference room of Moore Enterprises, her heart a drumbeat of anticipation and dread. The Kingston project, her proving ground, was nearing its final phase, a presentation to a consortium of investors that could secure Moore Enterprises' dominance in the tech world. As Brian Moore's assistant, Olivia had poured her soul into this moment, her nights spent refining data, and her days navigating the office's undercurrents of envy and bias. But now, a new threat loomed that could unravel everything she'd built. The office buzzed with the usual hum of ambition, but Olivia felt the weight of unseen eyes. Since her triumph at the Miami retreat, where she'd silenced Victoria Hayes's taunts with her brilliance, the whispers about her had grown sharper, laced with resentment. She was a black woman from Englewood, a rising star in a world that preferred her invisible, and her success was a mirror reflecting others' insecurities. Her desk, a fortress of organized chaos, held a photo of her mother Evelyn, whose recovery at Northwestern Memorial was a beacon of hope. Olivia drew strength from it now, her dark curls framing a face that refused to yield. The trouble began with a notification on her phone, an anonymously sent video circulating among Moore Enterprises employees. Olivia's breath caught as she played it, grainy footage from a recent client meeting, edited to show her laughing too closely with a male executive, his hand brushing hers in a way that suggested intimacy. The caption read, "Moore's Golden Girl, hard work or play." The implication was clear, a vicious lie designed to tarnish her reputation. Olivia's hands trembled, her anger a fire in her chest. But she recognized the handiwork Victoria Hayes, the heiress whose venom had shadowed her since their first encounter. Olivia's first instinct was to confront Brian, but he was in a board meeting, his presence a distant anchor. Instead, she traced the video's source, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she dug into server logs. The trail led to an external IP address linked to Hayes Industries, confirming Victoria's role. But the damage was spreading. Colleagues whispered in the break room, their glances cutting, and even Marcus Lee, her steadfast friend, looked at her with concern. "Liv, this isn't you," he said, his voice low over coffee at a Loop Cafe. "But it isn't good. The board's talking." Olivia's jaw tightened, her resolve hardening. "I didn't come this far to let lies take me down." She worked late that night, and the Chicago skyline was a glittering witness to her determination. Using her access to the company's security footage, she found the original unedited video of the client meeting, proof that her interaction was professional, the touch accidental. She compiled a dossier, her evidence meticulous, and prepared to fight. But the stakes escalated when Victoria appeared at Moore Enterprises the next morning, her cream coat contrasting with the office's steel and glass. Olivia said, her voice a silk-wrapped blade. "I heard you're having a rough day. Such a shame." Olivia stood, her brown eyes blazing. You think a video will break me? She said, her voice steady but fierce. I've got the truth, Victoria, and I'm not afraid to use it. Victoria's smile faltered, but she leaned closer, her words a hiss. You're a nobody playing at power. Brian will see through you soon enough. The confrontation was cut short by Brian's arrival, his presence a storm cloud. Victoria, he said, his tone icy. Leave. Now. She hesitated, then swept out her heels, clicking like a countdown. Brian turned to Olivia, his green eyes searching hers. I saw the video, he said, his voice low, strained. I know it's not true. Olivia's heart ached at the trust in his words and the pain in his eyes. It's hurting the company, she said, her voice raw. And me. Brian stepped closer, his hand hovering near hers. We'll fix this together, he promised. And the weight of that, we felt like a lifeline. They devised a plan, a public rebuttal at the investor presentation, where Olivia would present both the Kingston project and her evidence. The day of the presentation dawned crisp, the conference room packed with investors and board members. Olivia stood at the podium, her teal dress in a quiet defiance, and delivered her pitch with clarity that silenced the room. Then, with a deep breath, she addressed the video, projecting the original footage and server logs. She said this was a deliberate attempt to discredit me, her voice ringing with conviction. But my work speaks for itself, and I won't let lies define me. The room erupted in murmurs, then applause as the investors nodded, their skepticism replaced by respect. Brian stood at the back, his expression a mix of pride and something deeper, something that made Olivia's heart race. But Victoria wasn't done. That evening, as Olivia left the office, a text from an unknown number flashed on her phone. You won this round, but it's not over. Attached was a photo of Olivia leaving Brian's penthouse the previous week, her silhouette framed against the city's glow. The implication was clear, a threat to expose their closeness, to twist it into scandal. Olivia showed the text to Brian, her hands shaking, not with fear, but with fury. She's desperate, Brian said, his voice a low growl. But she's crossed a line. They traced the number to a burner phone likely purchased by one of Victoria's allies, and Brian called in his legal team to prepare a response. As they worked late into the night, the office empty save for their shared resolve, Brian's hand found hers, his touch, a quiet anchor. I'm with you, Olivia, he said, his voice soft but fierce. No matter what. The moment was electric, a confession wrapped in courage. Olivia looked at him, her heart a tangle of fear and hope. I don't want to be your weakness, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Brian's gaze softened, his thumb brushing her knuckles. You're my strength, he said, and the words were a vow, sealing something neither could deny. As the city hummed beyond the windows, Olivia felt the weight of their connection, a love forged in battle, fragile but unbreakable. The Chicago River flowed like a ribbon of hope, its surface catching the golden light of a late October evening. As Olivia Carter stood on its banks, the city's heartbeat echoing her own. The past weeks had been a crucible forging her into someone stronger, someone who no longer doubted her place in the world. The Kingston project, her triumph over Victoria Hayes's schemes, had secured more Enterprise's future and her own. But the man standing beside her, Brian Moore, his green eyes soft with a love he no longer hid, made her feel truly seen. The fallout from Victoria's video had been swift. Olivia's public rebuttal at the investor presentation cleared her name and exposed Hayes Industries' underhanded tactics, leading to a boardroom shakeup that sidelined Victoria. She'd left Chicago in disgrace, her threats reduced to echoes. But Olivia felt no triumph in her rival's fall. She focused on the future, her mother's recovery, her career, and the fragile, beautiful thing growing between her and Brian. Tonight, at a riverside restaurant where the city's lights danced on the water, Brian had asked her to meet him, his voice on the phone carrying a weight that set her heart racing. The restaurant, a cozy haven tucked beneath the Wabash Avenue Bridge, was aglow with candles, its tables filled with couples lost in their worlds. Olivia wore a deep burgundy dress, its fabric catching the light like a promise, her dark curls loose around her shoulders. Brian waited at a corner table, his navy suit tailored to perfection, but the vulnerability in his eyes stopped her breath. "You look beautiful," he said, standing to pull out her chair, his voice a low melody that warmed her to her core. Dinner was a dance of words and glances, their conversation weaving through the triumphs and trials of the past months. Olivia spoke of her mother Evelyn, whose health improved thanks to a new treatment plan funded by Olivia's salary. Brian shared his own fears of losing the company his father had built, of failing those who depended on him. "I used to think power was enough," he said, his gaze steady on hers. "But then I met you, Olivia, and you showed me what strength really is." The words sparkled, igniting a warmth in her chest that spread like wildfire. She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, the contrast of their skin a quiet testament to the worlds they'd bridged. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself," she said, her voice soft but fierce. "That's worth more than any contract." Brian's smile was a sunrise breaking through the last of her defenses, and for a moment, the world was just the two of them, the river a witness to their unspoken vows. As dessert arrived, a chocolate tart dusted with gold leaf, Brian stood, his expression shifting to something solemn, almost nervous. The restaurant fell quiet, the other diners sensing a moment unfolding. He took her hand, leading her to the terrace where the river's glow framed them in light. "Olivia," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "You've changed my life. You've fought for everything you have, and made me want to be better for you, for us." He paused, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket, and Olivia's heart stopped as he opened it, revealing a diamond ring that caught the city's light like a star. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his eyes searching hers, vulnerable, in a way she'd never seen. The world seemed to hold its breath, the river's murmur the only sound. Olivia's eyes filled with tears, not of doubt, but of a joy so fierce it overwhelmed her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Brian." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling, and pulled her into a kiss that tasted of promises and forever. The diners erupted in applause, their cheers a backdrop to the moment that sealed their love. Weeks later, Olivia stood in her mother's hospital room at Northwestern Memorial, the ring glinting on her finger as she held Evelyn's hand. "You found a good one, Liv," Evelyn said, her voice firmer now, her smile radiant. "He sees you, really sees you." Olivia nodded, her heart full. She'd fought for her place, her mother's life, and now for a love that defied the odds. Back at Moore Enterprises, she'd signed the Kingston deal, a triumph that earned her a promotion to project lead, her name now spoken with respect in the boardroom. The final chapter unfolded at a company gala where Brian announced their engagement to a stunned but cheering crowd. Olivia stood beside him, her burgundy gown a nod to their riverside night, her confidence unshakable. The whispers of doubt were gone, replaced by admiration, and even Marcus Lee, ever her friend, raised a glass in toast. To Olivia and Brian, he said, his smile genuine, and the room echoed his words. Olivia and Brian slipped away to the rooftop, the Chicago skyline, a canvas of their shared dreams as the gala ended. "We did it," she said, her voice soft, her hand in his. Brian pulled her close, his lips brushing her forehead. "No, Olivia," he said, his voice a vow. "You did it, and I'm just lucky to be along for the ride." They stood together, the city below, a testament to their journey, a love forged in fire and destined to shine. We hope you loved Olivia and Brian's journey as much as we did. If their story touched your heart, please give this video a like, share it with your friends, and leave a comment below to tell us how it made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of love, courage, and triumph.